Good evening, Grace College family. I'm Laurie Owen. I'm the Vice President of Academic Affairs for Grace College. I also have the honor of teaching in the School of Education. And today I have a special privilege of being here with two of my former students. And I'll introduce them by name, but then I'll let them tell you a little bit about their journey. First, we have Mr. Kyle Carter, and he is the principal of Jefferson Elementary School.
So I am in I was counting that the other day, year 16 of education. Grace College alum. You were my very first college class.
Very first
college class. And it was your first year in that role as well.
It was my first year.
So from my time in Grace College, I moved over to Jefferson Elementary School, where I taught 7 years in 6th grade at Jefferson under the leadership of Mr. Denny Duncan, who is now a Grace College official here. I moved from the classroom to become an instructional coach for Warsaw Community Schools. Did that for a couple of years before coming back to Jefferson to be the principal. And now in year 7. I had to think about that too at Jefferson.
I'm so glad I started young when I was really young. All right, and the other alum we have today with us is Dr. David Robertson.
Yeah, welcome. Happy to be here. I too am a Grace alum. Graduated in 2003. Started my teaching career in Indianapolis, teaching 4th grade at the Metropolitan School District of Perry Township, and then came back here to Warsaw. Taught for Randy Polston at Harrison Elementary School for 5 years. Jumped into administration at that point. Spent a few years in Goshen as the principal at Model Elementary School, and then came back to Jefferson for just 2 years, and then had the privilege of moving into my current role, which is Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education for Warsaw, and get to work with Kyle every day, which is a blessing. All
right, so we're going to talk a little bit today about kind of the unprecedented times that started last March with COVID. And so here you are in your building, and I think March 13th was the day, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you found out that schools were going to close and go virtual. And how did that change practice in the spring? And then how's that influenced your work this fall? Maybe at the school level, and then we'll go to the independent school level.
We look back. Our first COVID kind of crisis team planning meeting was actually February 19th. At that point, we were kind of watching the situation develop around the world and in our country, and we had a pretty good feeling by that point that the spring was going to change. We certainly didn't expect to be completely shut down on the 13th of March. So we started planning at that point, started working with principals on kind of some contingency plans. Thankfully at Warsaw, we have been one-to-one with student technology now for several years, and so there are a lot of districts around the state that had to try to get technology in the hands of kids before we could even shut down. And so we were really good there. We really just started planning on what does the instructional day look like when students aren't coming into school every single day, especially when you look at those 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. There's a lot of coordination and partnership that has to take place. So when the governor came out and then March 13th, that Friday the 13th, shut down, we had a lot of pieces in place, but there was certainly a lot of work to do, and we had a great team. So like I said, that team started meeting in February, and then at least twice a week for most of the day, just really working on all the details of what it would look like. So. Yeah.
And so, Kyle, from a teacher perspective, principal perspective, on a building level, how did you prepare, and then what did that look like for your summer off?
Summer off, that's a good one. It just happened. It happened so incredibly fast. We came in on Monday of that week, and the mentality and the mindset was we're not shutting down. And then Tuesday, we're not shutting down, we think. And then Wednesday, okay, we might be shutting down. Thursday, and Friday, we're shutting down. And it really was that quick. And we'd had conversations about what learning may look like, but we like Dr. Robertson said, we weren't planning for it. So students having the devices were very helpful. We immediately sent all of those devices home, and we really just began with what we would do in an e-learning situation when the weather wasn't working very well for us. But in those days, it's more about, all right, what can we do as an alternative to still keep the students engaged, but we're not in school on that day. And we had to immediately begin shifting to this is the primary way we're driving instruction in our schools. And that was a learning curve for all of us. And teachers weren't expecting, or they never had viewed e-learning in that format or in that way. So teachers began taking risks in what they could do in the classroom setting, which now is in their home, because at that point the schools were even closed. They were not allowed in the schools for a large part of that time in the spring. So teachers began to take risks, whether it was the latest and greatest technological tools. Who even heard of Zoom before March? I didn't know what Zoom was. I knew what some of the platforms were, but it just became the norm. We would be looking for ways to be synchronous with our students, and that wasn't always academic in nature. A lot of times that was about still trying to maintain community, trying to make students be, giving them a platform that they can still interact with their classmates, their teachers, because for a lot of our students, they're sitting at home and their only exposure they have is mom and dad, brother or sister, if mom and dad were even home. Some of them would still be working during that time as well. So we wanted to do everything we could to continue to engage students to help them to feel safe in that time as well as we could when we couldn't have our eyes and our arms around them. So it really took a village. It was more than just teachers and more than just me during that time. We had food service employees that were prepping lunches every day for students, and we never stopped feeding our students during that time. We had bus drivers that were going out into our communities to provide Wi-Fi for all of our students that maybe didn't have it. It was really an amazing thing to see in some of the hardest times. I don't think any of us were happy about that situation, but I just remember and looking back at how incredibly blessed we are at everyone and how we were working together in that time in the name of kids.
Yeah, a couple of things Kyle mentioned. Number one, we saw incredible innovation from our teaching staff, and it was so neat to see some of the pieces that grew out of that. Because like you said, it went from a normal snow day, so to speak, with e-learning to how do we start to deliver new content and move forward in our curriculum maps with e-learning, which is certainly a new challenge. And then from there were just a lot of neat pieces that came out of it. I think of the care calls, Kyle. So many of our instructional staff, we had a challenge from Dr. Hoffert to say, okay, how do we make sure we're checking in on kids and making sure these families are doing all right? And so we just really dedicated ourselves to, making care calls, making sure there's some kind of connection. One thing that surprised me was how much time and effort it takes to connect with people virtually. I mean, I would end the day exhausted. It's like I didn't do anything but sit here in front of my computer for 8 hours. But I know even as an elementary principal team, on Tuesdays I would try to check in with each of you individually, face to face, and on Thursday mornings we'd be together. And I feel like we've seen our elementary principal team really come together in some unique ways. And then Kyle mentioned food service and transportation and our custodial and maintenance team. We delivered tens of thousands of meals every Monday out at Lakeview. And then Wi-Fi on the buses out in the neighborhoods. I mean, Kosciuszko County still has a very legitimate high-speed connectivity issue. Yes. And that was one of our greatest challenges. We have about 1,500 kids out of our 7,000 that don't have a high-speed router in their house. So synchronous learning is tough if you can't have high-speed internet. And it's based geographically. It's not a socioeconomic necessarily. I live in a rural area. We don't have high-speed internet where we're at, so we have to work around. So there were challenges like that. That came out of this, but it was just really neat to see the team effort that came together during that time. And I think what it solidified in my mind is schools as the central hub of community. And we as educators have always known how important education is, but I think our community and our world is hopefully realizing that when schools are shut down, there are so many spokes that come off of that wheel that just don't function correctly until those schools are running, whether it's virtually or in person. And we just really saw so many facets of our community where the school needed to really become the hub during that time to make sure people were safe and kids were safe and getting the basics they needed. And so Kyle's right, we have a great team that continues to work hard to be flexible and fluid with this situation.
Your great team involves all these great Grace graduates, right? Okay, and so knowing the two of you as well as I know you as students and then now colleagues and friends, I know your heart for students, and a little bit of that has come out in your answers so far. But what was the most challenging piece for you? I know you're also both fabulous dads. What was the most challenging piece for you, having literally no, I guess I use the word control, not in a negative way, but no control over these children, and they're not all going back to situations that are safe. How did you process all of that? And what were some of the challenges and ways that you kept connected with those families?
Well, I'll just give a lot of kudos to Kyle here. I mean, Kyle was knocking on doors, making phone calls. Each school had a group of students that we just really had a hard time connecting with. And that's concerning, like where are they at?
Oh, yeah.
We haven't seen them. And so we had principals like Kyle who were doing everything to try to make contact. And having said that, there were still families we were never able to connect with. And so that was a real concern and real worry. And when we think about our push at Warsaw Schools to reopen in person in August, that was a big driver. We really felt strongly that there were really some dangerous situations going on in some of these homes. And from just even a mental health standpoint, which we can get into, we felt like it was important to get back to that routine. But some of our leaders like Kyle were just doing everything they could to make sure they were connecting with these families, both virtually, over the phone, going and knocking on doors, staying socially distanced, but making sure people are okay. It was, again, a lot of extra time and effort and energy to connect with families.
Yeah, the students are my kids, and I love them. And that was the hardest. It's the hardest 3 months of my career, hands down.
Yeah.
I was exhausted because, like you said, it was hard work, and you felt like there's only so much you can do behind a computer screen, but time moves so quickly during that time as well. You could look up and it's 6 p.m. all of a sudden, where did today go? But if we couldn't find a family or we couldn't interact with a family, somebody was knocking on a door. Somebody was going to check in. Somebody was trying to find and make sure everyone was okay. And really, I saw my role as trying to remove obstacles in any way, shape, or form. If there was an obstacle, I was going to try and step in and do it. We can't be here when the food's delivered. Okay, I'll go get it for you. When can I bring it to you? I don't know how to help my child with their e-learning. Okay, the bus is here from 12 to 2 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Send them down. I will come and help them. We really try to, as a staff, in any way, shape, or form, remove obstacles and barriers so that we could still keep contact and keep learning moving forward. And sometimes it really wasn't even about the learning. It was about still being a loving hand for kids.
And we could tell countless stories of principals who were doing that work, teachers, we had paras, bus drivers, going to homes, checking on kids. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of stories of that. I mean, my own personal kids, you feel bad for a lot of students who had a year they didn't expect. I think of our seniors last year, our kindergartners this year. I mean, there's just a lot of students that are in unique spots. But my own kids, miss their teachers, miss their friends. And so connecting socially, virtually, but I mean, we saw faces, just driving by and waving. Doing some of those parades, we're just like, hey, I get to see that face, even though they're 20 yards away and they're in the driveway, I get to see them. And so it was, again, that was some of the coming together that was really special to see that I don't know happens in every community. And it was just, we were really proud to be a part of that.
And you saw that in all the staff, the teachers included. So, you think of the school day as being 9 to 3:40. The school day looked very different from March to May. So, there were times I walked by my kid's room at night in the evening and I hear him talking, and all of a sudden I walk in there and there's the iPad and there's his teacher, and the teachers invested in their children to make sure they still had that contact at times that worked for them. It was encouraging to see in some really challenging times.
I think probably our biggest priority was connection. My challenge to the principal was, how are you connecting with your staff? The principal's challenge to our teachers, how are you connecting with the kids? I mean, it was just, connection was really, really important. And it's not that the academics took a back seat, but to some degree they did, because, again, our society just stopped. And we know how important, we believe God designed us for that connection and that face-to-face connection. And so how do we try to continue to maintain that, because that is a large part of the ministry that we do as educators. So.
And you talked a little bit about the learning aspect. So, our fear was they were going to come back and know nothing, right, this fall. What did happen with learning? How did learning change? And then how have you moved forward this fall trying to bring them back into some sort of system of normalcy?
So coming back into the school year, we expected there would be gaps. We expected there would be differences in where the students were when they left. And so far, we've been pleasantly surprised that while we might see some of that, it is not what we were maybe expecting it to be.
That's great news.
So students, in terms of their reading levels, their math skills, they did not lose ground like we worried might be the case. So we're spending time as we get started in this school year, when we encounter our power standards in this school year, we know that we may have to go, If this power standard, for example, is double-digit multiplication in some way, we know we may have to go back and backfill some of the things within that standard. What we didn't do is just start our school year with, here's the fourth 9 weeks from last year. We are moving forward. We just know that there are going to be times throughout the year where we're going to have to go back and maybe reinforce a skill that students would have learned the previous year. But we are doing that as we go in the school year.
Yeah, the data has really been interesting. We didn't see the slide back. I would say there were some areas where maybe some stalled out, stagnation a little bit. It didn't go forward as much as it would in a normal year, but we were expecting, like there could be some big gaps, some big moves backwards, and we haven't seen that in the data right now. A couple of unique student groups as well. I mean, our kindergarten students last year, when you're in the fourth quarter of kindergarten and it's just, you cannot replace that in-person experience with a teacher. So that's a group of kiddos, they're first graders right now, where we're really investing a lot of time and effort and energy with them. I would even say some of our transitional literacy kids, last year's second graders going to third grade, I both have boys in that group. I mean, that's another group where a lot starts to click at that age. So we're doing some targeted pieces with that, but I totally agree with Kyle. It wasn't the the perception you might have is like, oh my gosh, we just lost a whole year, and it wasn't that at all. It was really in pretty good places. And then we're working with principals and teachers right now to take a look at what does the first quarter look like this year as far as the end of quarter. We normally have assessments, things like that, and we're making some adjustments. We're giving teachers and principals flexibility to say, hey, based on the group of kids we've got and based on how many are quarantined right now, like we may need to make some adjustments on what the report card looks like and things like that. So we're really trying to offer a lot of flexibility to be able to meet those needs. So.
And I would also say within that one, we are better with some of the digital tools that now exist in education. So from a technological standpoint, some of the platforms we were using from March to May, some of the tools and websites that we had to learn on the fly, we can now implement in person and for our students as we need to. And that is one of the changes. The health guidelines do make it complicated for some of our families that are a little more chronic with illnesses. They are having to spend more time out of school, even in this new school year. So we've had to be creative on how do we continue education for a student that might be in a 10-day isolation or a 14-day quarantine, which is just part of the health guidelines. Yeah. Learning doesn't stop if you're out of the school like it might have once upon a time. I'll just make it up. I'll make it up when I get back.
Yeah.
So how much of that is happening right now? How much are you seeing? I know you had the option for some students to stay at home and have remote education, and then you have these students going in and out.
Yeah.
What's that look like as far as on a daily schedule and percentage, I guess?
So we did offer distance education for families that felt like that was the best fit for their students, and we came in right about 5% district-wide, which I've talked to a couple of other district leaders here in the last couple of weeks that are in the 30s with that. So we felt like that percentage was extremely low. At the elementary level, it's about 300 students. And so we had to work with our teachers association and everything else to try to figure out how do we make this work for our in-classroom teachers and distance education. And so we've got a distance education teacher, at least one at every grade level. Our instructional coaches have been champs. I mean, they've moved from a role that's professional development with teachers to they are our distance ed teachers in those grade levels. And they're doing an incredible job. I mean, I get to sit in on some of those classes, and it's fun, it's engaging, it's still, again, we're upfront with families, it still does not replace the in-person instruction in the classroom. And so we've had several families come back. They've had a few weeks, things have started pretty smoothly for us. They've decided to come back. And so about 300 elementary students to start with, which was about 5%. I think one of the biggest challenges for our principals and teachers then is as we do move forward with the CDC guidelines and we have, a student who's symptomatic, potentially COVID symptomatic, or if we have a positive case, there could be a 10-day isolation, 14-day quarantine. In some rare cases, we have a family member who is COVID positive, and so you have the 10 days where that family member is isolated, and then you need to do a 14-day quarantine. So we have a couple of kiddos that are out 24 calendar days. And so we hook up with the distance ed teacher, provide the opportunity for them to view that content, and the classroom teachers use some of those technology tools that Kyle was talking about to try to keep our students on track. But there's a lot of keeping track of kiddos and who's feeling well and when they can come back. And again, we use we use a lot of technology tools to be able to track that automatically, keep things in place. So we try to make that system automated as much as possible.
Yeah, I did think one of your administrators had lost it when I found out my twin grandsons were in the same classroom this year.
But those were some interesting things about it. And Laurie did call, or she texted me and said, are you sure you want to do that? But that was an example of some of the things that we have to do with the guidelines. And it was one that I wasn't really thinking about, but it makes sense from a health standpoint for siblings to be in the same classroom.
I just pray for that teacher on a regular basis.
Kyle brings up a good point. You've got the health priorities and then traditionally what we think of as educational priorities. And one of the things that just still, every time I walk in the classroom right now, it's so odd. You walk in, it's straight rows. Straight rows. And for years we've really worked on flexible seating, collaborative grouping. And one of the things we're trying to do to help social distance as much as our classrooms are generally in straight rows of desks. And so that's just, again, it's one of those things where it kind of catches you off guard every single time. And so even from a education standpoint this year, even though we're back in person, there's still a lot of challenges for teachers as we look at how do we best create an engaging classroom that's socially engaging and at the same time try to be safe from a health perspective. And that's, each school had a reopening plan that they worked on in July and August that just takes a look at what's the classroom look like, what about parent pickup, what about the cafeteria, what about recess, and Kyle and his leadership team are just constantly adjusting that to make moves when either regulations change or recommendations change, which they do sometimes, or we realize something's not working or is working and we want to do it elsewhere. So
and from a Grace College School of Ed perspective, we appreciate so much that you're still allowing our students to have real classroom experiences. And you're right, when you walk into a classroom and even at this level, it looks nothing like you believe it should, and how students learn best in that collaboration. It's really hard. So I appreciate that. Grace appreciates you both allowing our students to still have those experiences.
And we feel like we've got really good guardrails in place where we can do that. And what we've seen is, as corporations, if they can be really tight about the guardrails, the safety protocols around there and things like that, there is a lot of flexibility to be able to do more than maybe we thought we would have going into the year. And we've seen that in the first 3.5 to 4 weeks here that Warsaw's been open.
Good.
Yeah, and within that, we've had to be flexible. We've had to do some things differently. And sometimes that's not always been the most exciting. But I think everyone, and it goes back to that team mentality, we're willing to do what it takes to keep the doors open for our students. Because we all agree, at least we do at Jefferson, that the best place for our kids right now are in the school. They were home for 3 months, and that was not always the best situation. And that hurt. That really, it hurt them, it hurt me, it hurt their teachers to know that they maybe weren't always in the best places. So to have a safe place every day for my 400 students, we'll do what it takes to make that work.
Yeah, I think Kyle said whatever it takes. Another example, we have a operations team now, we call it. It's our custodial, it's our maintenance, it's transportation, and they come together once a week. It's the whatever it takes team, and they just are looking at, we're doing tons more cleaning than we ever were before. I mean, we had great protocols in place before, but this team's coming together once a week and saying, all right, what are the hot issues that we're having, and we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure we deal with that so that we can stay open. And even for students who weren't in crisis, I think of my own 3 kids that are in school. I mean, there was an aspect where hey, they just need some routine, they need the social connection and things like that. And then the last thing is the kids have just been great. I mean, they've been incredible to deal with. I think they've been happy to be back. They've been flexible. Some of the issues that are frustrating for us to deal with, some of the restrictions and things like that, the kids are just, it's whatever. They're fine with it. And so that's what's been fun to see how great the kids have been with it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you should put on your mask. Okay.
Yeah.
I need airplane arms spread out a little bit. Okay.
Yeah.
I often wonder how many come with one mask and go home with another.
There are some children I think we give a mask to every day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had to get some really cool ones for a birthday gift because I kept thinking it's going to be my boys that come home with the different masks.
Yeah. Well, we had a summer school program. We had about 300 elementary students in our summer school program, and so we had a trial run in late July, early August, and the masks, we learned a lot during that time. I mean, one of the things we learned the first day was, okay, a lot of kids came in with adult-sized masks. They're just falling down constantly, so we started ordering 2 to 3 different sizes of masks to be able to have available. So it was neat to have a summer school that went extremely well, where we could learn a lot of those things to say, okay, now we know what our kindergarten teachers need day one based on that. Yeah.
Okay, so as professionals and dads and those who care deeply for families and children, what would you say to our Grace family right now as we continue to move through this? But we understand the importance of community, and how do we survive as a family unit?
Yeah.
How do we keep moving forward?
Well, I think one of the things that we continue to deal with is there are still a lot. There are a lot of individuals that are really struggling with a lot of anxiety around the situation we're facing. I mean, there's sometimes a lot of fear. We have folks who have loved ones that are very sick or have been very sick themselves. And so I think encouragement is a huge piece. And so if there are ways to encourage those within the Grace family, especially if you know an educator that maybe you went to Grace with, just reach out through a handwritten note and say, hey, I'm praying for you. What can we do to support you? Because our teachers and our staff are putting on a bold face and coming to work every day. But some of them are really in crisis internally. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I think from a family perspective, one of the challenges that Kyle mentioned that he and I are probably both dealing with as dads, shutdown and connecting virtually really blurred the lines between home and work. Just really blurred that line when you talk about even your kiddos being on a Google Meet at 6 p.m. with their teacher. And so I'm trying to really encourage our families to say, listen, like we've got to talk about what do those homework boundaries look like, and so that we can maintain balance, because it's great to be able to work from home, but the downside of that is you're always at work too.
Always at work,
and so that's a unique challenge that had already been there, but just was really intensified, I think, during this time. But just really taking care of each other, assuming positive intent, trying to find ways to encourage, because while we're coming here and doing our best for our kids, there are people who are really hurting during this time, or maybe have lost. I mean, we have staff members who have lost a couple of loved ones during this pandemic. And as much as we feel positive about where we're at, we want to be sensitive to the fact that not everybody is having the same experience that we maybe are.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I mean, Dr. Robertson's spot on when it comes to just the assume positive intent. I promise you that some of the things that we've asked students and families to do wouldn't be my first choice either, but it goes back to this allows us to keep the doors open, which allows us to best take care of students. So I'll always come back to, that's what we're going to do, because the intent is to take care of kids. Encouragement, absolutely. There have been times in the last 4, 5, 6 months I have to just throw social media out the window because, when this all first began, everybody was in it together, community, how can we help support you? But you can just see emotions change the further we get into this pandemic. And now there's a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and sometimes that's taken out on individuals that really don't have the control. It wasn't their choice, it wasn't their decision, but you're the face, and sometimes you're the easiest one to take that out on. That would be my wish, my desire, is that when you're frustrated in that moment, to just take a step, look back at what that intent was, and just double check that thought again, and just flexibility, positivity, grace. We're all in this together, and we were there at one point, and that's changing the further we go into this.
Kyle, you mentioned the word grace, and that's one of the things I think we've talked about throughout the spring a lot is, as believers especially, we would hope that all of our interactions are coded, just come across as gracious. But this pandemic is a really great opportunity that regardless of what the interaction was, like, let's just give each other a lot of grace. I may not feel fear and panic over what's going on, but that doesn't mean I don't have a friend or a colleague that is, and let's be gracious about that. Or I might feel a lot of fear and panic, and I'm frustrated they don't. Let's give grace that way. And so I just think if we can really focus and be explicit and upfront about the fact that, guys, we got to be gracious with each other in these things. And then I think the last piece for me was probably a month into the whole thing, I just felt really frustrated with some of the work that I was doing every day. It's like, man, we're doing all this stuff. It's so far away from what I felt like I was called into originally. And God just really used a couple people in my life and just really convicted me of, Dave, why did you get into education to begin with? And it was to serve people. It was to to show Christ's love through education, be able to help people, and I still get to do that. It just looks a lot different right now than it did a year ago, and so I just have to every day come back to the fact that, you know what, even if this person was upset with me or they're upset about something, if I can walk out of that interaction and they felt like they were helped. We had a parent last week that was frustrated about some issues with a textbook, and that might have been the most important interaction they had all day. For me, it's just another 30 minutes. It's a textbook. We'll get it taken care of. But that might have been the most important meeting they had all day. And so if I can walk into every interaction just knowing, hey, I'm here to help them, and let's be helpers through this time and not folks who make it more tense. So yeah.
All right, and I just want you both to know just how proud we are of you, and we're so thankful that you're in the community and that you continue to serve so well, and it's just a joy to watch the impact that you're both having as Grace graduates on families and children in this community. So thank you so much for...
It's a blessing. I can't believe I get to do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You were a part of that.
Yeah.
You were.
We learned it from your class.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Boys are so cute. All right. All right. Thank you for joining us today, Grace family, and welcome home.